The blade of the guillotine drops. A hush falls over the crowd, followed by a thunderous roar of approval. In the heart of Paris, thousands cheer as yet another aristocrat's head is lifted high for all to see. It's the summer of 1793, and the once mighty nobility of France are brought down one by one. The king himself has already gone to the scaffold, his queen not far behind. France is no longer a kingdom. It is something new, something terrifying, and something the world has never seen before. A revolution has consumed the nation, shaking not only France but all of Europe and indeed the world. But how did it come to this? How did the most dazzling kingdom of Europe, home to splendor, wealth, and culture, descend into such chaos? To understand the fall of heads and the rise of ideals, we must step back to a France that was cracking long before 1789. Back to a society on the brink of collapse, into a revolution that would change history forever. At the dawn of the late 18th century, France appeared magnificent. The Palace of Versailles glittered with gold, kings ruled with divine authority, and the nobility enjoyed a life of leisure. But beneath the glittering surface lay cracks so deep, they threatened the very foundation of the room. The French monarchy was drowning in debt. Centuries of war, especially the 7 Years' War, and France's support for the American Revolution, had drained the treasury dry. Ironically, the ideals of liberty and independence that France had helped nurture across the Atlantic would soon boomerang back to haunt the monarchy itself. Taxes were high, but not for everyone. The burden of keeping the kingdom afloat fell squarely on the shoulders of the poorest farmers, peasants, and commoners, while the clergy and nobility, protected by privilege, paid almost nothing. A system designed for inequality was fueling resentment, and that resentment was ready to explode. Society in France was divided into what were called the three estates. The first estate was the clergy, the priests and bishops, guardians of religion and wealth. The second estate was the nobility, those with titles, lands, and privileges. Together, these two groups made up only a small fraction of the population, yet they owned vast wealth and wielded enormous influence. The third estate was everyone else: peasants, workers, merchants, professionals. They were over 90% of the population, yet they carried nearly all the taxes, endured hunger, and lived with little hope of change. This imbalance was not just unfair. It was combustible. To make matters worse, the late 1780s brought misery in the form of failed harvests. Crops withered, food became scarce, and bread, the staple of the French diapique, became unaffordable for the poor. Hunger spread through the cities and countryside alike. At the same time, the Enlightenment was sweeping through Europe. New ideas about reason, rights, and equality were challenging the old order. Philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire questioned monarchy, privilege, and the divine right of kings. People began asking, why should a few live in luxury while the many starve? Why should birth decide destiny? And so, with unrest boiling and debt crushing the kingdom, King Louis XVI did something that had not been done for over 170 years. He summoned the Estates General, a meeting of representatives from all three estates, to find solutions. It was May 1789, and the Estates General gathered in Versailles. At first, it looked like an opportunity for dialogue. Soon it became a Stage 4 confrontation. The Third Estate, long ignored and disrespected, demanded more power. They wanted votes to be counted by head, not by estate. After all, they were the vast majority. But the king and the nobles resisted. Tension snapped. Locked out of their meeting hall, the Third Estate gathered in a nearby tennis court and swore. An oath they vowed not to separate until they had created a new constitution for France. It was the birth of the National Assembly. People of France were taking power into their own hands, but the monarchy did not give up easily. Louis XVI, worried by the rising defiance, ordered troops into Paris. Rumors spread that he was preparing to crush the movement by force. Paris erupted. On July 14, 1789, crowds stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress that symbolized royal tyranny. They seized weapons and freed prisoners. The fall of the Bastille became the flashpoint of the revolution, a symbol that the people could topple even the mightiest walls. Across France, peasants revolted, nobles fled, and the old order trembled. Something irreversible had begun. In the months that followed, the National Assembly moved quickly. The feudal system, centuries old, was abolished. Privileges of nobles and clergy were swept aside. A declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen was issued, proclaiming liberty, equality, and fraternity. These were not just words, were a thunderclap that echoed far beyond France, shaking monarchies everywhere. For the first time, the notion that all men were born free and equal was not just philosophy, it was law. Yet revolutions rarely move in straight lines. France was still a kingdom, and Louis XVI remained on the throne, though now a king in chains. He resented his loss of power, and in 1791 he and his family attempted to flee Paris in disguise. They were caught and brought back in shame. Trust in the monarchy collapsed. More radical voices began to rise. Among them, Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer with fiery ideals, who believed the revolution must be defended at all costs. By 1792, France was not only battling itself, but also its neighbors. Monarchies across Europe feared the French example. If kings could be overthrown in Paris, why not in Vienna, Berlin, or London? Austria and Prussia declared war on France. Instead of crushing the revolution, their threats radicalized it further. Parisian crowds stormed the royal palace, and the monarchy was formally abolished. France declared itself a republic. Soon after, Louis XVI was put on trial as a traitor. The verdict was death. In January 1793, the king was guillotined, his head raised to the crowd. Europe gasped. France had executed its monarch, and there was no going back. The revolution, however, did not stop at regicide. If anything, it spiraled further. Fear of counter-revolution and foreign invasion gave rise to what became known as the Reign of Terror. Led by Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, the government ruled through fear. Anyone suspected of opposing the revolution, whether noble, priest, or even fellow revolutionary, could be arrested and executed. The guillotine became a grim fixture of Paris. Thousands died, including Queen Marie Antoinette. Revolution devoured, not just its enemies, but its own children. And yet amidst the blood, the revolution transformed France. Old hierarchies were shattered. A mass army, drawn from citizens rather than mercenaries, was raised to defend the Republic. France, once a kingdom of subjects, was becoming a nation of citizens. The idea that people had rights and that governments existed to serve them was spreading across borders. It's impossible to contain. But absolute power corrupts, even in the name of liberty. Robespierre, once seen as incorruptible, grew rigid and tyrannical. His vision of virtue through terror alienated even his allies. In July 1794, he too faced the guillotine. The revolution had turned on one of its fiercest defenders. His death marked the end of the terror. But the revolution itself had left France transformed forever. What, then, is the legacy of 1789? The French Revolution shattered the old order of monarchy, feudalism, and privilege. It proclaimed ideals of equality and citizenship that would echo across centuries, inspiring movements from Latin America to Asia. It showed that the people could topple kings, that nations could be born from revolution. At the same time, it revealed the dangers of unchecked radicalism, the ease with which liberty could slide into tyranny. France's revolution would pave the way for Napoleon's rise, reshaping Europe. But even before that, it had reshaped ideas of governance, society, and justice. The revolution was not a single event, but a storm that swept through France and beyond. It was hunger and hope, blood and ideals, terror and triumph. The heads that rolled under the guillotine were not just victims of politics, they were markers of a world in transition. Out of their fall rose a new age, one in which kings would never again be beyond question. And people everywhere would begin to believe in their own right to decide their destiny. the French Revolution, remains one of the most dramatic upheavals in history, a moment when an old world collapsed and a new one began. Forged not in quiet reforms, but in fire, steel, and the roar of the crowd. It reminds us that history is not static. It is made by people, by their choices, their struggles, and their dreams. And in 1789, in the streets of Paris, a people dared to dream of liberty, equality, and fraternity and, in doing so, changed the world forever.